In the year 2000, two men flew from California to Dallas to ask for $50 million. They ran a small DVD by mail company that was losing money. The dot-com bubble was bursting. Their company had about 300,000 subscribers and had never turned a profit. By most measures, they were not in a strong negotiating position. But they had an idea, and they believed in it, and they had arranged a meeting with the most powerful video rental company in the world to pitch a partnership. The meeting was with Blockbuster. The two men, Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, walked into the room and made their pitch. They wanted to run Blockbuster's online brand. Blockbuster would promote them in stores. Together, they said, they could own both the physical and digital future of home entertainment. Blockbuster's CEO, John Antioco, listened to the pitch. Then he passed. By most accounts, he found the whole thing a little bit funny. A small, money-losing DVD mail service wanted $50 million. Thanks, but no thanks. The two men flew back to California. Their company was called Netflix. 23 years later, Netflix was worth roughly $150 billion. Blockbuster had filed for bankruptcy long before and closed nearly every store it ever had, and existed primarily as a punchline and a single remaining location in Bend, Oregon. This is the story of how that happened, and more importantly, why. This is Mismanaged. I'm Joseph. Each episode, we take a real organization, walk through what went wrong at the leadership level, and pull out lessons that actually apply to the work most of us do every day. Today's episode is on Blockbuster Video, a company that didn't just miss the future, it had multiple chances to grab it and said no every single time. Blockbuster Video was founded in 1985 by a man named David Cook in Dallas, Texas. Cook's background was in software, specifically database systems for the oil industry. When the oil business slowed down in the mid-1980s, he turned his attention to a different industry that was booming: home video rental. At the time, video rental stores were everywhere, but most of them were small, independent shops. They were often disorganized, had limited selection, and frequently ran out of popular titles on Friday nights. Cook saw this as a logistics problem. His solution was to apply the same database thinking he had used in the oil business to the video rental business, track inventory precisely, stock more copies of new releases, build stores large enough to carry thousands of titles, make the whole experience feel clean and organized. The first Blockbuster store opened in October 1985 in Dallas. It was 25,000 square feet, enormous for a video rental store at the time, and stocked about 8,000 titles. It was open until midnight. It didn't carry adult content, which made it the kind of place families felt comfortable walking into, and it was immediately successful. Cook expanded fast. Within 2 years, there were dozens of stores. By the early 1990s, there were hundreds. The company went public, attracted big investors, and became the dominant force in home video rental seemingly overnight. In 1994, Viacom, the massive media company behind MTV, Nickelodeon, and Paramount Pictures, bought Blockbuster for $8.4 billion. At the time, it was one of the largest entertainment acquisitions ever made. The Viacom years were not good for Blockbuster. Viacom had bought the company partly as a way to distribute its own movies and TV shows, which created an immediate conflict of interest. Blockbuster was supposed to be a neutral retailer carrying all studios' content, but its new parent company had a financial interest in pushing certain titles over others. Beyond that, Viacom loaded Blockbuster with debt to finance the acquisition and then struggled to manage a retail chain that was very different from its core entertainment business. David Cook, the founder, had left years earlier. The executives who followed him through the Viacom years cycled through without making a lasting mark. The company kept growing. It was still a powerful brand with a loyal customer base, but the internal focus that had made it sharp in the early years started to drift. By the time Viacom was ready to reduce its stake in the mid to late 1990s, Blockbuster was profitable but unfocused, carrying too much debt and without a clear strategy for what came next. At its peak, Blockbuster had more than 9,000 stores worldwide, over 60,000 employees, 65 million registered customers, stores in more than 25 countries. It was, by any measure, a dominant business. And like a lot of dominant businesses, it had one habit that was very good for its bottom line and very bad for its relationships with customers: late fees. If you rented a movie and brought it back late, Blockbuster charged you. These weren't small charges. A few days late on a popular new release could cost you more than the rental itself. At their peak, late fees generated roughly $800 million a year for Blockbuster, about 16% of their total revenue. Customers hated late fees. Surveys consistently ranked them as the number one complaint about Blockbuster. People would drive past a Blockbuster to go to a smaller, cheaper competitor just to avoid them. But Blockbuster kept them, because $800 million a year is a very compelling reason to keep something going. This is important to remember for later. By the late 1990s, Blockbuster was so dominant in the home video space that it had significant power over Hollywood studios. It could negotiate exclusive rental windows, demand favorable terms, and essentially decide which movies got prominent shelf placement and which didn't. It was not a company that felt pressure. It was a company that applied pressure. That comfort, that sense of being too big and too established to be seriously threatened, is the invisible character in everything that happens next. The main players are John Antioco, who became Blockbuster's CEO in 1997, Carl Icahn, a billionaire investor who owned a large chunk of Blockbuster's stock and made Antioco's life difficult, Jim Keyes, who replaced Antioco in 2007, Reed Hastings, the co-founder of Netflix, and the roughly 60,000 Blockbuster employees who eventually lost their jobs. Over about a 15-year period, Blockbuster had multiple clear opportunities to adapt to a changing market, and passed on all of them, not because the threat was invisible, not because the technology didn't exist, but because the people making decisions kept choosing the comfort of what was already working over the risk of what might work next. The slow decline started in the mid-1990s and accelerated sharply after 2007. Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy in 2010. Blockbuster took place primarily in the United States, though Blockbuster had stores globally. The key decisions were made in corporate offices in Dallas and later in New York. And since Blockbuster was enormously profitable doing what it was already doing, late fees alone brought in nearly $1 billion a year. Changing the model meant giving up a guaranteed revenue for uncertain future revenue. Every time a decision came up about whether to adapt, the short-term math argued against it. And for a long time, the short-term math was right. Until it wasn't. John Antioco took over as CEO in 1997. He was, by most accounts, a solid retail executive. He had turned around struggling businesses before and understood the video rental industry well. When he arrived, Blockbuster was still dominant but starting to show cracks. The company had been mismanaged through its years inside Viacom, had significant debt, and was losing some of its edge. Antioco focused on stabilizing the business, paying down debt, and improving operations. Under his early leadership, Blockbuster performed reasonably well. Then, in 1997, a man named Reed Hastings co-founded a company that would mail DVDs directly to your door. The story goes that Hastings was inspired, or at least annoyed, by a $40 late fee he received from a Blockbuster rental of Apollo 13. Whether or not that story is fully accurate, the company he built was explicitly designed to solve the problem Blockbuster had created: the friction, the late fees, the need to drive to a store and hope the movie you wanted was in stock. Netflix launched its DVD by mail service in 1998. You went online, chose what you wanted, and it showed up in your mailbox in a red envelope. No late fees, no driving anywhere, a flat monthly subscription instead of per rental charges. It was a clever idea. It was also, for a while, a money-losing idea. Netflix burned through cash in its early years. The dot-com bubble bursting in 2000 made things worse, which is why, in that same year, Hastings and his co-founder Mark Randolph flew to Dallas. They needed either a partner or an exit. They thought Blockbuster might be both. Antioco passed. Netflix was small, unprofitable, and the whole concept of online ordering for physical goods felt uncertain in 2000. From where Antioco was sitting, it was not an obvious threat. Blockbuster had 60 million customers, 9,000 stores, and nearly $1 billion a year in late fee revenue. Netflix had 300,000 subscribers and was actively losing money. It's easy to look back and say Antioco was wrong. In the room in 2000, it wasn't as obvious as it is now. There's also a broader culture point worth making here. Inside Blockbuster at this time, the people who had the most influence were the ones who understood physical retail, real estate, store operations, shelf layout, supplier negotiation. That was the skill set that had built the company, and it was the skill set that got rewarded. People who raised questions about online competition or the future of digital delivery were not the loudest voices in the room. They weren't necessarily ignored outright, but the organization's center of gravity pulled toward what it knew. That pattern, where a company's existing strengths shape which voices get heard, is one of the most common and least visible ways that successful organizations become slow to change. What matters is what happened after. Netflix didn't go away. It kept growing. The subscription model resonated with customers who were tired of late fees and driving to stores. By the mid-2000s, Netflix had millions of subscribers and was consistently profitable. Antioco watched this happen and, to his credit, decided to respond. In 2004, he made two significant moves. First, he eliminated late fees. This cost Blockbuster roughly $400 million in lost revenue in the first year, a staggering number that required real courage to swallow. Second, he launched Blockbuster Online, a Netflix-style DVD-by-mail subscription service. By 2006, Blockbuster Online had evolved into something called Blockbuster Total Access, and it was genuinely competitive. Total Access let subscribers return their mail DVDs at any Blockbuster store and immediately get a free in-store rental in exchange. Netflix couldn't match this. They had no stores. Total Access was combining the convenience of mail delivery with the instant gratification of physical retail, and customers responded. Blockbuster was adding subscribers faster than Netflix in early 2007. Reed Hastings later admitted that Total Access scared him. He said Blockbuster was executing incredibly well during this period. This is the part of the story that surprises most people. Blockbuster was actually winning. Then Carl Icahn showed up. Icahn was a billionaire investor who had made his fortune by buying large stakes in companies he believed were being mismanaged and then pushing loudly and aggressively for changes. He owned about 10% of Blockbuster stock. He had been publicly critical of Antioco for years, largely over compensation issues and the cost of eliminating late fees. Icahn waged a proxy war, a battle for board seats fought through shareholder votes. He won enough seats to have real influence over the board, and the board, feeling the pressure, forced Antioco out in 2007. The timing could not have been any worse. Antioco's replacement was a man named Jim Keyes, the former CEO of 7-Eleven. Keyes was a successful retail executive, but his expertise in convenience stores, snacks, drinks, everyday essentials, not in digital strategy or the entertainment industry. Keyes looked at Total Access and saw the cost. Blockbuster was losing money on every subscriber because the free in-store rental exchange was expensive to operate. He cut the program back sharply, and subscribers left. The momentum Antioco had built evaporated within months. In 2008, in an interview with the Dallas Morning News, Keyes was asked about the competitive threat from Netflix and the video kiosk company Redbox. He said, "I don't see Netflix as a threat at all, nor do I see Redbox as a threat." Netflix that year had approximately 8 million subscribers. Streaming video, the technology that would ultimately make physical rental entirely obsolete, was just beginning to take off. Keyes doubled down on the physical retail model, invested in adding merchandise to stores, and largely ignored the digital future that was arriving whether Blockbuster was ready or not. Redbox, the other company Keyes dismissed, was also worth paying attention to. Redbox operated vending machine-style kiosks in grocery stores and gas stations, where customers could rent a DVD for $1 a night. No membership required. No store to drive to specifically, just grab a movie while you're already at the grocery store. By 2010, Redbox had more than 20,000 kiosks across the country and was processing millions of rentals per month. It was eating directly into Blockbuster's lower-end customer base, the people who rented one movie on a Friday night without planning ahead. Blockbuster was being squeezed from both sides at once. Netflix was capturing the customers who planned ahead and wanted variety. Redbox was capturing the impulse renters who just wanted something cheap and easy. The middle ground, Blockbuster occupied, planned trips to a physical store, premium prices, wide selection, was shrinking fast. And the company's debt load, still heavy from the Viacom acquisition years and the cost of running thousands of store locations, left very little room to maneuver. Blockbuster did eventually launch a streaming service. It was called Blockbuster On Demand. It arrived late, had a smaller content library than Netflix, and failed to gain meaningful traction. By the time it launched, too many customers had already moved on. The brand that had once meant movie night for millions of families now mostly meant frustration. Long gone were the days when walking into a Blockbuster felt like an event. Blockbuster filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in September 2010. The company listed $1.46 billion in debt. It had started the decade as the undisputed king of home video rental. It ended it in bankruptcy court. Dish Network bought the remaining Blockbuster assets in 2011 for $320 million, a fraction of what Viacom had paid just 17 years earlier. Dish had hopes of using the Blockbuster brand and its remaining store footprint to compete in the streaming and satellite TV space. It didn't work. Dish closed most of the remaining stores over the next 2 years. By 2013, the Blockbuster name had essentially disappeared from the American retail landscape. What had once been a company with nearly 9,000 locations worldwide had been reduced to a handful of franchise-owned stores that continued operating independently for a few more years before closing one by one. By 2019, only one Blockbuster store remained open in the entire world. It is located in Bend, Oregon. It is operated by a woman named Sandy Harding, who has worked there for decades and has become something of a celebrity in her own right. The store draws tourists from around the world. People rent movies there and take pictures with the sign. Netflix, as of this recording, has over 260 million paid subscribers worldwide. So John Antioco left Blockbuster in 2007 after being pushed out. He has largely stayed out of the public eye since. In interviews he has given over the years, he has expressed frustration about how close Blockbuster was to successfully adapting, and specifically about the role Carl Icahn played in cutting off that effort right when it was working. Carl Icahn lost approximately $180 million on his Blockbuster investment. He has spoken about it as one of his biggest mistakes. He continued his career as an activist investor and has remained one of the most well-known figures in that world. Jim Keyes left Blockbuster in 2010 as it entered bankruptcy. He has since been involved in other business ventures. He has not spoken extensively in public about his time at Blockbuster. Reed Hastings stepped back from the CEO role at Netflix in early 2023, transitioning to the executive chairman. He is widely regarded as one of the most successful technology executives of his generation. The employees. At its peak, Blockbuster employed more than 60,000 people worldwide. The vast majority lost their jobs as stores closed over the course of the bankruptcy and wind down. This happened gradually over several years, but the total number of jobs lost was substantial. And Sandy Harding continues to run the last Blockbuster in Bend, Oregon. The store has been featured in documentaries, news segments, and has its own social media following. It is one of the most unusual success stories in retail history. Blockbuster did not fail because it was a bad business. For most of its life, it was a very good one. It failed because the people running it consistently chose the safety of what was already working over the risk of what might need to work next. They passed on buying Netflix when it was small and cheap. They eliminated late fees and launched a competitive online service, steps in the right direction, and then had that effort cut short by an investor who was focused on short-term costs rather than a long-term strategy. They replaced the CEO who was adapting with one who didn't see the threat coming. By the time the company fully understood how serious the situation was, it was too deeply in debt and too far behind to catch up. The stores were closing before the strategy was clear. The story of Blockbuster is ultimately about the danger of optimizing for today at the expense of tomorrow. Every single decision that led to the bankruptcy made sense in the short term. Late fees generated revenue, passing on Netflix saved $50 million, and cutting total access reduced losses. Each choice looked reasonable in the moment. Together, they added up to extinction. So let's look at some of these key failures. So, failure number one, they confused being dominant with being safe. At its peak, Blockbuster had 9,000 stores and 65 million customers. That kind of dominance can feel permanent, and it isn't. The video rental industry existed for about 20 years before streaming made it largely obsolete. During those 20 years, Blockbuster had multiple warning signs: the rise of Netflix, the growth of online ordering, early streaming technology, and repeatedly responded to them slowly or not at all. Being the biggest player in a market does not protect you from the market changing. If anything, it can make you slower to respond because you have more to lose by abandoning what's working and more comfort in the assumption that things will keep working. Failure 2. They let a short-term investor override a long-term strategy. Antioco's Total Access program was expensive. It was also working. Blockbuster was growing faster than Netflix and had a genuine competitive advantage, something Netflix literally could not copy because it had no stores. Econ saw the short-term cost and pushed to have it cut. The board went along with it. This is one of the clearest examples in business history of short-term financial pressure destroying a long-term strategic advantage. The cost of Total Access looked bad on a quarterly earnings report. The cost of killing it looked fine on paper right up until the company went bankrupt. Failure 3. They hired for the wrong skill set at the wrong moment. Jim Keyes was a good retail operator. His background was in convenience stores, so that meant high volume, low margin physical retail. That skill set was genuinely valuable in many situations. It was not the skill set Blockbuster needed in 2007, though. When its most urgent challenge was figuring out how to compete in a world that was moving to digital streaming. The moment you bring in a new leader, you are also bringing in their assumptions about what matters, what to focus on, and what the threats are. Keyes did not see Netflix as a threat. That was not an unusual view for someone whose entire career had been in brick and mortar retail, but it was the wrong view for the moment, and by the time the evidence was undeniable, it was too late to course correct. Failure 4. They built their business on something customers hated. Late fees was enormously profitable. They were also the single most hated thing about Blockbuster. Reed Hastings has said, with or without the Apollo 13 story being strictly accurate, that late fees were a fundamental design flaw in Blockbuster's customer relationship. They created resentment. They gave customers a reason to look for alternatives. When Netflix offered a subscription model with no due dates and no penalties, it wasn't just a convenience, it was a direct answer to the things customers liked least about Blockbuster. Blockbuster knew customers hated late fees. They kept them anyway because the revenue was too good to give up. When Antioco finally eliminated them, it cost $400 million and felt radical. But it should have happened years earlier, not as a defensive move against Netflix, but as a basic acknowledgement that building a business on a feature your customers despise is not a stable long-term foundation. Blockbuster was one of the most dominant retail businesses in America for nearly 2 decades. It had the brand, the customer base, the relationships, and the resources to adapt to a changing market. It had a CEO who, in his final years, was actually making the right moves. And it still failed because of an investor who prioritized short-term losses over long-term survival, a board that let him, and a replacement CEO who didn't recognize the threat until it was too late. The company that passed on buying Netflix for $50 million filed for bankruptcy 10 years later with $1.4 billion in debt. One store remains. So, now that we've looked at how Blockbuster actually functioned, let's look at some of the lessons that we can take away from this whole story. So, lesson number 1. Know the difference between your business and the problem your business solves. Blockbuster was in the video rental business, but the problem it solved for customers was simpler. How do I watch a movie at home tonight? That problem didn't go away. The way to solve it just changed. Companies that survive major market shifts tend to be the ones that stay focused on the customer problem rather than the specific solution they currently sell. A travel agency that understood it was in the business of helping people plan trips could adapt to online booking. One that understood it was in the business of selling paper tickets could not. As a manager, this applies to your team and your department too. Ask regularly, what problem does my team actually exist to solve? If the answer is tied to a specific tool, process, or method rather than to an outcome, you are more fragile than you think. The tools and methods will change. The underlying need usually doesn't. Lesson 2. Short-term financial pressure can kill long-term strategy, and it's your job to name that tension out loud. Antiocho's Total Access program was generating real subscriber growth. It was also losing money in the short term. Econ focused on the losses. The board went along and the strategy was cut. This dynamic plays out in organizations of every single size. A project that is clearly heading in the right direction gets cut because it hasn't shown results fast enough. A new process that would improve things long term gets abandoned because the transition period is expensive or disruptive. A good hire gets passed over because the salary is above the quarter's budget. The job of a manager, whether you're running a department or a company, is to hold both the short term and the long term in view at the same time, and to make the tension between them visible to the people above you. If your leadership is making a decision that trades long term health for short term relief, that trade should be explicit and understood, not disguised as a simple cost-cutting measure. Name it, say, here's what we gained today, and here's what we are giving up tomorrow. Then let the decision be made with open eyes. Lesson 3. When the market changes, make sure the person leading the response understands the new landscape. Blockbuster in 2007 needed someone who understood digital media, subscription models, and technology strategy. They hired someone whose entire career had been in physical retail. The result was a leader who made decisions suited to a market that no longer existed. This is a direct lesson for anyone involved in hiring or succession planning. When you are filling a leadership role, you are not just filling a title. You are making a decision about what skills and perspectives will guide the team or organization through the challenges ahead. The right question is not, who is the best leader we know? It is, who is the best leader for what we are about to face? In fast-changing environments, that question should be asked explicitly. The skills that got you here are not always the skills that will get you to the next place. A great operations manager is not automatically the right person to lead a digital transformation. A great sales leader is not automatically the right person to manage a turnaround. Match the person to the moment, not just to the job description. Lesson 4. If your customers consistently dislike something about the way you operate, fix it before a competitor does it for you. Late fees were hated. Everyone at Blockbuster knew it. Employees heard it every day at the counter. It was the number one complaint about the brand for years, and Blockbuster kept them because they generated $800 million a year. Netflix didn't invent the idea of renting movies at home. It invented a version of that experience that didn't have the thing customers hated most. That's not a technological breakthrough. That's listening to what people don't like and building something that addresses it. As a manager, pay attention to the consistent complaints from customers, from employees, from anyone who interacts with your product or your team regularly. Not the occasional one-off frustration, but the things people mention again and again and again. Those recurring complaints are almost always pointing at a real structural issue. The organization has just learned to live with it because fixing it seems costly or complicated. It is almost always less costly to fix it yourself than to wait until someone else fixes it and takes your customers with them. There's a Blockbuster store that is still open. One, in Bend, Oregon. People go there and rent movies, they take pictures with a sign, they buy t-shirts, they sit in the parking lot and feel nostalgic for something they probably stopped using 15 years ago or never really interacted with. It is, in a strange way, a fitting end for the company this story is about. Blockbuster, at its best, was about a simple, good experience walking into a store, picking something off the shelf, going home and watching it. That experience had real value. People genuinely loved it. What the company around that experience failed to do was protect it, not from competition, not from technology, but from its own short-term thinking. The late fees that customers hated, the Netflix meeting where they passed, the investor who cut off the one strategy that was actually working, the CEO who didn't see the threat. None of those decisions were made by bad people. They were made by people optimizing for what was right in front of them in the room on the spreadsheet and not paying enough attention to what was coming around the corner. That is the lesson Blockbuster leaves behind. Not that disruption is oh my goodness gracious. Not that disruption is inevitable, not that big companies always lose, but that the gap between a company that adapts and one that doesn't is almost always filled by a series of small, reasonable sounding decisions that add up to something irreversible. Thank you for listening to Mismanaged.